I had a friendly debate with a fellow out in California when we lived out there. We used to have these mini debates in his class, and we just go back and forth. The students would ask us questions, and he interrupted me one time. He said, well, you can't talk about evidence for creation. Science deals with things we can taste, feel, and touch and stuff like that. He said, take energy, for example. Whoops. He said, whoops, made a mistake, didn't I? And, of course, I kind of filled in the void. Yeah, there are a lot of forms of energy. Gravity. Can't weigh it, test it, taste it, feel it. Can't buy a bottle of it or anything like that. But we know it's there by the effect that it has on things. The invisible things of God. God's a spirit, but we know is there by the effect that he has on things, and most especially the effect that he has on our lives. Well, given that, let's take a look at a couple of things. So I began to take a look in my area of biology. The Morris Whitcomb book had dealt especially with geology. And the evidence for creation was everywhere. I can't believe I'd missed it all that time and so on. Well, in the pebble and the arrowhead, we could talk about the difference between hard and soft rock. In living things, we can talk about the two basic ingredients of living things are DNA molecules and protein molecules. Fortunately, both of these are fairly straightforward. DNA is a long string of repeated units called nucleotides or bases, kind of like a string of pearls would make up a pearl necklace. And a protein molecule is a long string of amino acids. So we could think of DNA as a pearl necklace and proteins as a diamond necklace. And in all forms of life, viruses, plants, animals, bacteria, human beings, the works, the sequence of DNA that you inherit tells the cell how to line up amino acids to make each of the proteins responsible for structure and function. So the cell, in a sense, takes a look at the genetic code and says, okay, there's these 3 beads over here. I'll line up one amino acid over here, and just checks back and forth like that. Well, what about that relationship? Is that what you'd expect by time, chance, and chemistry? Well, at first you might say so, because after all, DNA is a string of bases, protein is a string of amino acids, and nothing is more natural than a reaction between acids and bases. Somewhere along the line, you poured vinegar on baking soda and watched the fizz and so on. So the evolution says, see, I got you anyway. If you just wait long enough, bases will start lining up amino acids, and life will begin just by time, chance, and chemistry. No creator is needed. Exactly the opposite. The problem is that natural relationship between bases and acids is the wrong one as far as living things are concerned. Oh, bases and acids react when? At death. What is death anyway? The triumph of chemistry over biology. As soon as molecules in your body begin doing what they want to chemically, you begin to return to the dust from which you're taken. In DNA, the bases stick out along the side of the chain like this here. But in proteins, the acids are part of the chain, a little red arrow as I've got it here. And so these, if you let DNA and proteins do what come naturally, they stick together in all the wrong places and actually contribute to the aging process and finally the decomposition, the destruction of life. The living relationship, the one you need for living things, is using a series of bases, actually taken 3 at a time, to line up a series of amino acid R groups, the groups that stick out along the side of the chain. Now, those groups can be acids, but they can also be a base. Single ring, double ring, short chain, long chain, with or without sulfur, they can be almost anything chemically. The point's this: there's no natural tendency for a series of bases to line up a series of R groups. That relationship has to be imposed from the outside. At this fundamental level, then, we have evidence that life on Earth is a product of special creation. I'll give you another example of the same sort of thing. Can aluminum fly? Or in Australia, can aluminium fly? Well, if you take that aluminium or aluminum, and a volcano might throw it somewhere, but it's not going to fly from point to point unless what? You stretch it out, nice long tube with a tail, some wings and engines, then it flies. We call it an airplane. Did you ever wonder what it takes to make an airplane fly? Okay. Take off the wings, study them, they don't fly. Take off the engine, study them, they don't fly. Take the little man out of the cockpit, study him, he doesn't fly. Now, try not to think about this if you're planning to fly somewhere after the conference or over Christmas. But an airplane is a collection of non-flying parts. Those 747s have 4.5 million non-flying parts. What does it take to make an airplane fly? Something every scientist can logically infer from his observations, something every scientist can use to formulate and test hypotheses. What does it take to make an airplane fly? Creative design and organization. Creative design and organization. Who gets the credit for designing those things? The aluminum, the gas, the rubber tires? No. The engineers get the credit for that. They get awards. They get all sorts of honors and adulation. Yet if you look at a living cell, much more sophisticated, much more complicated and intricate than any airplane, including the 747s, the Concords, and the space shuttle in the works. You know, who gets the credit? Oh, the molecules did it. They didn't get any help. Just thrown together by time and chance. Science tells us, no way. As long as science is based on logic and observation, science will understand the evidence for creation, even if evolutionists continue to deny it. When you take a look at a living cell, by the way, what have you got? You've got millions of molecules in a living cell all working together in harmony. But none of those molecules are alive. There's not a single molecule in your body that's alive. DNA isn't alive. Proteins aren't alive. A living cell is a collection of non-living molecules. What does it take to make a living cell alive? Answer: something every scientist can logically infer from his observations. Something every scientist can use to formulate and test hypotheses. What does it take to make a living cell alive? Creative design and organization. Creative design and organization. But perhaps the clearest and simplest evidence of creation, don't you like those words? Clear, simple? Perhaps the clearest and simplest evidence of creation is the marvelous fit of living things to their environment, adaptation. Now, there are lots of examples here, but I have to admit, one of my favorite examples of this adaptation is those birds that make their living banging their heads into trees. Okay, the ones we call woodpeckers. Now, did you ever wonder what it takes for a woodpecker to peck wood? Well, the answer is kind of astonishing. When that woodpecker hits the tree, the deceleration experienced is 1,000 times gravity, much more. You know, from Clearwater Christian, we can look right across Florida. It's flatter than this floor. You can see all the way across the state. In fact, it was just a few weeks ago, I was watching the space shuttle take off from the balcony of the college over there. And they experience 3 to 5 times gravity, presses them back in the chair and all that sort of thing. But this woodpecker, the deceleration when it hits that tree is so great that a slip to the left or a slip to the right and the shearing force would literally spin the cover off the brain. So you got to have a lot of good nerve and muscle coordination here. When it hits the wood, by the way, the eyelids close. Some scientists think that's to keep the wood chips from getting into the eye. Some scientists say that's to keep the eyeballs from popping out of the sockets. Both of those may be true. And one thing you'd have to say, the woodpecker needs a heavy-duty bill. He needs a double reinforced, tough skull, some shock-absorbing tissue between the skull and the bill. Well, once you get all these parts together, everybody would agree that it's fit to survive. After all, if living things were created to multiply and fill the earth, they'd be fit to survive. The question is, how did they get that way? Plan and purpose, or time, chance, and struggle? Well, I can't believe I used to teach this as a fact of evolution, but the way I used to explain it is something like this. You always start with something simpler. A bird that's not a woodpecker flying around minding its own business, zots, gets hit by a cosmic ray. First step in evolutionary progress. Some sort of damage to DNA, some sort of mutation, and a little baby bird is born. We'll just say just by accident. This was a lucky accident, and a little baby bird was born with a heavy-duty bill. Okay, he decides to try it out. Whack! He throws his head into the tree. Bill is okay, but squishes in the front of his face. One dead bird, end of evolutionary story. See, now you see why evolution is so slow. Well, you might say, well, maybe it was the other way around. Okay, maybe he got the heavy-duty skull first. Oh, whack! He throws his head into the tree. This time, his skull is okay, but crinkle, 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 the bill all folds up like an accordion. You're still nowhere. You have to have both of those things at the same time before either one has survival value. Well, since the fall, since death entered the world, some of those woodpeckers are doing more than drilling holes to store acorns. They're looking for beetles crawling around in the bark of the tree. Well, of course, the beetles hear all this noise, so they just crawl down the tunnel. And so if a woodpecker is going to catch the beetles, he needs something else, a long, sticky tongue. But if you get a long, sticky tongue just by chance, what are you going to do with it? Okay, here it is dangling out of your bill. You keep biting your tongue. You know, that's got to hurt. Trip over it as you hop along the ground, flying along over a low twig. What? Tongue wraps around the twig and you hang yourself. Some real hazards with this. Well, the answer for the woodpecker is to slip that tongue in a sheath that goes all the way around the skull, under the scalp, and inserts into the right nostril. So the next time you watch a woodpecker probing for bark beetles, watch the scalp twitch as that tongue goes in and out.